Are we on a commodity supercycle? Well, we explain. Commodities, of course, are the blocks that we use to construct the world. Includes oil, gas, metals, industrials, soft commodities, food, and so on.
Welcome to Venezuela Insider, the only place in Venezuela for expats, digital nomads, entrepreneurs, investors, travelers, and related internationals. For more information, venezuelainsider.com.
A commodity supercycle will be something that will play in favor of the nations that are rich on commodities, like my home country, Venezuela. But also we have to talk about nations like Brazil or Saudi Arabia that are very rich regarding commodities. So today we are going to discuss 6 reasons why we are poised to have a commodity supercycle on the near future. Number 1 is ESG policies. In case you don't know, ESG stands for Economic and Social Governance. It's a very particular political philosophy that many Western nations are applying. So basically are making more difficult economic growth and economic production, especially the exploitation of commodities. And most of not only the nations, but the biggest companies within those nations are forced to comply with many restrictions regarding production, pollution, and so on. So it's going to be more difficult and more bureaucratic and more expensive in order to do business and production worldwide, apply on the most developed nations. Many nations all over the world, especially the rich ones, are applying these ESG policies, like United States, Canada, UK, the European Union, and so on. However, you cannot legislate the necessity for commodities and do services and industrials on worldwide economics. So that creates an opportunity for the nations that are not complying with ESG policies. And of course, we have to mention the BRICS nations. Most of them are very rich regarding natural resources, but also industrials. Since they are not as forced to comply with ESG policies, they will have the opportunity. First, it's going to be less supply of commodities and industrials, and that will increase the incentives in order to produce more commodities. And those countries, especially the BRICS nations, they can actually benefit. And at the same time, if the Western nations want to apply fully these ESG policies, they are at the risk of becoming poorer and decreasing their standards of living. Now, the funny thing though is that ESG demands new technology regarding energy, like solar, like wind energy. However, these mechanisms in order to have clean energy, quote unquote, are not as profitable and also demands a lot of raw materials and natural resources. So that will create an incentive in order to further increase the worldwide prices of these commodities, but at the same token make more expensive energy creation on the ESG nations that of course are applying these policies. And also something that you have to consider is that many of the traditional ways to create energy, like for instance uranium, is actually environmental friendly. However, since the situations on Chernobyl and Fukushima, the governments are not as pleased in order to invest on this type of energy creation. However, if you want to have efficient energy consumption and also environmental friendly, uranium has to be one of the ways, but most of the Western nations are still not in favor. But these developing nations that are going to take over not only the production of uranium, but also the nuclear energy of uranium, they are going to benefit pretty heavily. Number 2 is CAPEX. And in case you don't know, and you're not a finance geek like myself, CAPEX is just the reinvestment on any given industry. So in order to have a sustained growth and production on commodities or industrials or whatever might be the case, you need constant reinvestment on the operations. However, most of the money regarding investing is not going as much on oil production or natural gas, so on, so on, so on, mostly on Western nations. So what ends up happening is that becomes more expensive. So the people who are actually investing on these types of technology, of these sectors and industries, are the ones are going to reap the benefits. At the same token, it's going to become more expensive for nations that they do investments. Number 3 is the war on Ukraine. And of course, that involves Russia. Russia has become the boogeyman of geopolitics, so many nations have decided not be involved doing business with Russia or reducing their exposure to the Russian economy. So you have to know that Russia is a juggernaut of commodities, especially on energy. So what ends up happening is that just a handful of nations are the ones that are fully committed in order to do business with Russia, and mostly the Western nations that are not doing business with Russia, they have to, of course, look for substitutions, and that process takes time, takes money, and of course, increases the demand, and hence increase the prices of commodities. Number 4 is the Middle East Gulf region. What happens is that first, we saw that Saudi Arabia has joined the BRICS group, and most of the Arab nations are the ones holding the OPEC production. So every time they came together on the OPEC summits and decided to cut production, the price increases. But at the same token, it's a very delicate situation on the Middle East that sometimes creates some uncertainty, some instability, especially on the oil and gas sector, and also that will affect a super cycle of commodities that will play in favor of the Arab and Gulf nations. Number 5 is nearshoring. And let me explain yet again. Regarding oil supply worldwide, we had a situation just until a few years ago, before the start of COVID, when the worldwide supply chains were interconnected. US connected with China, with Vietnam, and also European Union connected with Japan, and so on and so on and so on. But due to the past few years and the conflicts regarding, of course, the COVID restrictions, and right now the war on Ukraine, what ended up happening, of course, we have to talk about geopolitics, the situation with Taiwan, and so on and so on. Right now, many of the worldwide superpowers are recurring to nearshoring. So instead of having a supply chain that is very intertwined with a potential enemy, geopolitical speaking, now they are recurring in order to invest and have their supply chains tied to a closer ally, maybe a domestic ally, and keeping the supply chain, let's say, a little bit more expensive because you have to do some changes regarding the supply chains. However, it's a little bit more expensive, however, can be more efficient and more trustworthy on the long term. For instance, we saw this year that China used to be one of the largest exporters to industrial goods to the United States. However, the situation reversed on the past few months, actually, and right now Mexico is more important regarding the worldwide supply chain, of course, for the United States to China. Now, the main issue regarding this specific situation is that the United States is saying that trusts more the Mexican industrial production than the Chinese industrial production. The Chinese production might be more efficient. However, Mexico, according to the decisions of the United States, is that it's more trustworthy. Of course, it's close to the United States, so the time frame of the transportation is not as great, and that creates a competitive advantage and more certainty for the long run. And finally, number 6 is worldwide consumption. Here's what happens. We have a mindset on the past, let's say, several decades, when the rich countries are the United States and Canada and Western Europe and Japan and so on. And the rest of the countries are less developed. So this happens because, of course, since those nations, the quote-unquote rich nations, are more productive, they have better standards of living. So you see in the United States, people with beautiful homes, but also with a beautiful car, a beautiful SUV, They travel, they took trips and vacations and travel and so on, and they consume a lot and they eat more meat and poultry. So they contaminate the world more, to say the least. And of course, it's not their fault. They are just pursuing their happiness, they increasing their standards of living. However, many nations developing at the moment want the same standards of living. People in India, people in China, people in Latin America, people in the Middle East, and so on and so on. And they want the similar standards of living. And since the standards of living actually in the economic output of these nations is slowly, steadily increasing worldwide, even in Africa, so they want these Western standards of living, having a nice car, a nice house, eating meat and poultry, taking trips, taking vacations worldwide, and so on and so on and so on. So what will end up happening is the demand for goods and services is going to increase. And of course, when you increase the demand for goods and service, you increase the demand for industrials and of course the commodities. Remember, the commodities are the materials, the raw materials that you need in order to create industrial activity. So, of course, the standards of living increase worldwide on the developing nations that increase the demand for industrial output. And of course, the industrial output is going to increase the demand for commodities. And probably this is the last one that I'm mentioning, but probably the most important. We are seeing a commodity supercycle on the next few years. I say 90% yes. So we have to see what ends up happening. I'm going to wait to read your comments below.
Thank you for watching Venezuela Insider. Please like, share, and subscribe. Follow us on social media. If you want to work with us, VenezuelaInsider.com. Thanks again and have a nice day.